Welcome to T.R.E.E., Trauma-Informed Parenting with Dr. Hasshan. The T.R.E.E. podcast presents resources, skills, and healthy parenting approaches rooted in self-care, self-compassion, and self-love, because we recognize that healthy roots produce healthy fruits. This session, we'll be talking about restorative justice, restorative parenting, and restorative practices. What is restorative justice? Restorative justice is a system of criminal justice that focuses on rehabilitation of offenders through reconciliation with victims and the community at large. It looks at the relationship between the community, the victim, and the offender, and how do we work together to restore the relationship. Goals of restorative justice there are three parties: the survivor, or the victim as some say, the offender, and the community. And the goal is to achieve safety through avoiding or repairing harm rather than focusing on control and punishment. We recognize that people are social beings and require authentic relationships to thrive. Restorative practices focuses on the strength and functioning of interpersonal as well as community relationships. As we always say in the T.R.E.E. curriculum, healing occurs in authentic relationships and within community. And we also know that excellence or success or wellness occur in authentic relationships and within community. So what are restorative practices? The implementation of policies and behaviors that support restorative justice at the individual and organizational level. Why is this important to you as a parent? Because all of the schools throughout the Valley have committed to a restorative practice approach. So we want you to have that common language and to understand that if something happens within the community or the school, that what they're doing is they've been talking about de-emphasizing traditional school-based disciplinary interventions while greatly expanding this use of the zero-tolerance disciplinary approaches that exclude students from their schools. Research shows that removing youth from the learning environment for extended periods of time is not an effective way to manage student behavior. Zero tolerance as an approach hurts the relationships between teachers and students and doesn't help students address the core issues that exist. Individual students and the overall classroom end up far worse than before. It's critical that parents understand the difference between a restorative-based approach to an educational system in which teachers and administrators are welcoming the fellow students and the entire staff, where students have peer mediators and support staff to help them intervene, to help the students sit down together and de-escalate a situation, or utilizing a conflict as a point of intervention where they can sit down and restore the relationship. Teachers and administrators welcome students back to school as they enter in a restorative practice-based educational system versus a zero-tolerance education system where students are greeted with metal detectors and police searches, teachers scold them in front of their peers, students talk back and are given detention, SROs detain them and arrest students on both sides without the opportunity to reconcile and work together. What is this idea of restorative parenting? There are different types of parenting styles: authoritative, authoritarian, permissive, and uninvolved. I'll say that again. Authoritative parenting, authoritarian, permissive, and uninvolved. We want you to think about, what style do you use? Look at some of the words on the screen that represent an authoritative parenting style. Look familiar? What about the words that represent an authoritarian parenting style? Which of those reflect your parenting style? Now we'll go to a permissive parenting style. Take a moment and reflect on the screen. Look at some of the words. Think of the language and how that is reflective of your parenting style. What about an uninvolved? We don't all fall into just one box. Things to consider. We parent the way that we were parented. My mother taught me what my grandmother taught her, what my grandmother and grandfather taught her, what my great-great-great-grandmother and grandfather taught her. Our parenting style influences the way in which we discipline our child. So we have a question that we want you to ask yourself. Does your parenting approach foster connection with your child? Restorative parenting practices. Restorative justice is a thoughtful process, not a snap judgmental decision made in the heat of the moment, right? So we need restorative parenting to be very similar, where both parents and adults within the family work with children to provide a cooling down period. Parents might need to say, I'm going to send you to your room, and then we're going to talk this over later. This gives a parent the opportunity to give themselves a moment to breathe and cool down instead of just reacting emotionally to a child's behavior. There are things that happen in our children's behavior that are triggers for us, and we want to respond rather than react. Learn how to respond, learn how to reflect, learn how to breathe, and learn how to think through how you want to respond intentionally as a parent, because we're always teaching lessons to our children, even as we're helping them understand when they've made some mistakes. We have to ask the right questions. When both parents and children sit down ready to talk, each person should have the chance to share their position and their piece. And that sounds odd in many of our communities, because we've been taught that children are to be seen, not heard. But we've learned that if we offer space for them to communicate, that they begin to thrive and become higher functioning members of society and begin to make better decisions independently. So we want to ask questions like, what happened? And listen to the response. What were you thinking or feeling at the time? And again, as a parent, listen to the feedback and response that our children are offering. What have you thought about since that happened? Who has been affected by your decision making? What do you think needs to be done to make this right? The essence of it is finding out what it was like for your child. What were they thinking? And finding out what they need. We want to make sure that there's always a road to repair. We don't want to blame and shame our children. We want them to be the best that they can be and to know that we believe in them, that we're here to support them, and that there's a way forward. There are 3 R's to the strategies of restorative parenting. 1, the first R, which is one of the most critical, is regulate. Breathe, slow your breathing down, lower your heart rate, get out of those big emotion mood where you're just reacting. Because we can go from a 0 to 100 real quick, as Drake says, right? But we want to take the time to really think through this. The second R is relate. Connect with a trusted adult before you move towards processing. That's something we want our children to do as well as ourselves. We don't ever want to make decisions in isolation. We want to get support, we want to get feedback from people that we trust, and we want to model that for our children. And the third is reason. Apply some form of logic and solution skills to reflect on the incident. Positive parenting, disciplinary techniques, set boundaries, build connection and gain cooperation, be firm but loving, always avoid blaming and shaming, try to utilize natural and logical consequences, use positive reinforcement, model respect. We've learned that things like respect, trauma-informed care, restorative practices, and emotional intelligence cannot be taught, especially to children. They have to be modeled. Another technique is striving for empathy and using time in versus time out. Really engaging and being in relationship, because we now know that rejection and exclusion are violence and relationships are the cure.
Again. See, you have to calm down.